Ethan was only 8 years old, but he carried within him a strong sense of right and wrong. He had always believed in protecting the people he loved, no matter how hard it was. On what was supposed to be the happiest day of his father's life, Ethan faced a decision that would change everything. As he stood in the chapel, watching his father prepare to marry Emily, a woman with secrets darker than anyone suspected, he felt the weight of truth pressing down on him. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the chapel as guests whispered in anticipation. At the altar, David Matthews stood tall in his black tuxedo, his nerve showing only in the way he smiled. "You look great, Dad," Ethan whispered, clutching the small ring pillow in his tiny hands. His curls were neatly combed, his suit matching his father's perfectly, but his brown eyes were clouded with worry. David, oblivious, ruffled his son's hair affectionately. The wedding march began. Guests rose, all eyes shifting toward the bride. Emily entered, radiant in lace and silk, her golden hair cascading around her shoulders. David's face lit up as she approached, whispering, "You look beautiful." But while everyone else was enchanted, Ethan stood frozen, his gaze fixed not on Emily but on his father, his grip on the pillow so tight that his knuckles turned white. Memories swirled in Ethan's mind. He thought back to the day his father had first introduced Emily. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and David had been beaming with excitement. "I've got someone special I want you to meet, buddy," he'd said. Emily had seemed warm then, kneeling down to Ethan's level and speaking softly. For a moment Ethan had felt hopeful, but as weeks turned into months, that hope dimmed. When David wasn't around, Emily's smiles vanished. She ignored him, snapped at him, and made cutting remarks that chipped away at his confidence. Once, when Ethan spilled juice on the carpet, Emily had grabbed his arm so tightly it left him trembling. "If you ever tell your father, you'll be very sorry," she'd hissed. Around David, however, she transformed into the perfect fiancée, sweet, kind, and attentive. David never noticed the difference. Ethan tried to tell his father once. He gathered his courage and explained that Emily wasn't the same when David wasn't around. But David dismissed it as nerves and told him to give her a chance. From that day on, Ethan stopped trying. He grew quieter, retreating into himself, while Emily grew bolder. Then one night, Ethan overheard something that shook him to his core. He had gotten up late for a glass of water and heard Emily speaking in hushed, angry tones on the phone. "We can't rush this. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Once it's done, we move to phase 2, the insurance policy. David doesn't suspect a thing." Ethan froze in terror. She was plotting something with someone named Mark, and his father was at the center of it. Ethan scrambled back to his bed, his heart pounding. He didn't understand everything, but he knew Emily was planning something terrible. In the days that followed, he began watching her closely. He noticed the secretive texts, the quick smiles when David entered the room, the constant excuses to leave the house. More than once, Ethan saw the name M on her phone screen. Mark. A week before the wedding, Ethan overheard even more. Emily was on the phone again, this time saying, "The policy is ironclad. Once we're married, it'll be easy. A tragic accident, a grieving widow, and we're set for life." Ethan's blood ran cold. They weren't just scheming for money. They were planning to hurt his father. Terrified but determined, Ethan realized he could not stay silent any longer. He had tried before, and his father hadn't believed him. But now, with the wedding only days away, the truth could no longer stay hidden. Ethan knew he would have to step forward, no matter the cost, and reveal everything he knew before it was too late. Footsteps paused outside the bathroom, then slowly descended the stairs. Breathing heavily, Ethan slumped against the wall, his small chest heaving. This was worse than he had imagined. Emily and this man, Mark, weren't just after money. They were planning to hurt his dad. Maybe even... Ethan couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. He had to do something, but who would believe him? His father thought Emily hung the moon, and Emily had made it clear she could twist anything Ethan said against him. For the next few days, Ethan was on high alert. He watched Emily's every move, trying to piece together her plan. She was careful, but sometimes she slipped. One evening, Ethan walked into the study to find her hurriedly closing David's laptop. She jumped when she saw him, a guilty look flashing across her face. "Oh, Ethan," she said, her voice overly bright. "You startled me." "I was just checking some wedding RSVPs." Ethan nodded, though he didn't believe a word. As soon as Emily left, he went to the laptop. It was locked, but he knew his dad's password. It was his birthday. The browser history had been cleared, but one tab remained open. A life insurance company's website. Ethan's stomach churned. This must be the policy Emily had been talking about. He was about to dig deeper when footsteps approached. Quickly, he closed the laptop and pretended to look at the bookshelf. David entered, smiling. "Hey, sport, what you up to?" "Just looking for a book," Ethan lied, hating how easy it was becoming to deceive his father. "That's my boy, always with his nose in a book. Come on, dinner's ready." As they walked to the dining room, Ethan's mind raced. He had to find a way to stop Emily. The next day, he got his chance. David had a last-minute meeting, and Emily was out on one of her mysterious errands. Alone in the house, Ethan opened Emily's sleek silver laptop with shaking hands. It was password protected. He tried her birthday, the wedding date, but nothing worked. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed a yellow sticky note poking out from under the laptop. Peeling it back, he saw a string of numbers and letters. Heart pounding, he typed them in. The laptop sprang to life. Ethan's eyes widened as he scrolled through Emily's files. Dozens of documents had suspicious names. David's schedule, policy details. He clicked on one labeled insurance policy. A PDF opened, full of legal jargon he didn't understand, but a few phrases leapt out. Accidental death, double indemnity, payout of $5 million. $5 million. That was what his father's life was worth. His hands shaking, he dug further and found a folder named Mark. Inside were dozens of photos of a tall, dark-haired man with a scar above his left eyebrow. In some, he was alone. In others, he was with Emily, looking very much like a couple. Ethan felt sick. Emily wasn't only planning to hurt his dad, she was cheating on him too. Suddenly, a car pulled into the driveway. Emily was back. In a panic, Ethan closed everything and shut down the laptop, putting it back exactly as he'd found it. The front door opened. "Ethan?" Emily called. "Yeah," he called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just doing homework." She appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "Don't you usually work in your room?" "It's quieter here," Ethan said quickly, avoiding her gaze. She stared at him for a moment, then smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, don't work too hard. Dinner will be ready soon." As she turned away, Ethan glimpsed her phone screen. She was texting someone. The contact name was simply M. That night, lying in bed, Ethan's mind whirled. Emily and Mark were planning to kill his dad for the insurance money. They would wait until after the wedding, then stage an accident. He felt overwhelmed. He was just a kid. How could he stop two grown-ups from carrying out such an evil plan? And with the wedding only days away, time was running out. His father wouldn't believe him. Emily had spent months painting him as jealous and difficult. But as dawn crept through his window, Ethan made up his mind. He had to stop the wedding, no matter what it took. At the ceremony, the officiant's words washed over Ethan in a meaningless jumble. Panic tightened his chest. He knew he had to say something before it was too late. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. The words hung in the air. This was Ethan's chance. Fear paralyzed him, but then his voice broke free. "Wait," he shouted. "Stop the wedding." A gasp rippled through the church. All eyes turned to Ethan, trembling as his small voice echoed in the silence. "Ethan?" David turned in shock. "What's wrong, buddy?" "You can't marry her, Dad," Ethan said, his voice quivering but determined. "She's not who you think she is." David knelt down, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "What are you talking about?" "She's been lying to you." "She's planning something bad," Ethan insisted. Emily let out a nervous laugh, trying to mask her fear. "Oh, sweetie, I know this is scary for you, but—" "No," Ethan cut her off. "I heard you on the phone with Mark. I know about the insurance policy. You're planning to hurt Dad." The church fell silent. David's face paled. "Ethan, that's a serious accusation." "Where did you hear this?" "I overheard her," Ethan pleaded. "Late at night. They talked about money and how they'd get rid of you after the wedding. I saw the insurance policy on her computer. It was for millions of dollars if you die. And I saw pictures of her with Mark. He's not a wedding planner, he's her boyfriend. Whispers erupted through the crowd. Emily's composure cracked. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You're going to believe the wild story of a jealous child?" But then, losing control, she hissed at Ethan. "You little brat, you've ruined everything." Gasps filled the church. David's eyes widened. For the first time, he saw the mask slip. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Emily, what have you done?" Realizing her mistake, Emily tried to backtrack, but it was too late. David turned to Ethan. "Tell me everything." And so Ethan did. He recounted everything. Her cruelty when David wasn't around, the overheard conversations, the insurance policy, the photos with Mark. Piece by piece, the truth unfolded before the stunned guests. Emily stood rigid, her mask gone, her eyes full of cold calculation. David's heart broke as he looked at her. "I think this wedding is over," he said. Emily bolted, pushing past guests and fleeing out the church doors. David immediately called 911, his voice shaking as he reported what had happened. Guests whispered in shock, some running to the doors to catch a glimpse of the fleeing bride. David hung up and turned to his son, tears in his eyes. "I should have listened sooner. I'm so sorry." Ethan threw his arms around his father. "It's okay, Dad, I'm just glad you're safe." Moments later, 2 officers entered the church. As they began asking questions, a commotion near the entrance caught Ethan's attention. A tall man with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow was pushing his way inside. Frantic. Ethan's stomach dropped. He recognized the face from Emily's laptop. It was Mark. The church had fallen into stunned silence. Ethan's cry had already shattered the wedding, but the shock deepened when his gaze shifted to the doorway. "That's him," Ethan whispered, pointing. "That's Mark." David's head snapped up, following his son's trembling finger. His eyes widened in recognition, remembering the description Ethan had given him earlier. The scar, the dark hair, the shifty eyes. "Officers," David said urgently, his voice shaking. "That man by the door, I think he's involved. He's the one my son overheard Emily talking to." The officers moved instantly. Officer Johnson stayed close to David and Ethan, while Officer Rivera strode toward the entrance. "Sir, stop right there," he called. For a heartbeat, Mark froze, his eyes darting wildly around the church like a cornered animal. Then in a burst of panic, he turned and bolted. Officer Rivera gave chase, shouting into his radio for backup as he disappeared through the doors. The guests, still reeling from the revelations, murmured in disbelief. "Mr. Matthews," Officer Johnson said calmly, though his voice carried authority, "it would be best if you and your son came with us to the station. We'll need your statements and any evidence you have regarding Emily's plans." David nodded numbly, still trying to absorb it all. "Of course. Whatever you need." He turned to Ethan, his voice softening. "Buddy, are you okay to go with me to the police station?" Ethan straightened, his small frame radiating bravery despite the fear in his eyes. "Yeah, Dad, I want to help." As they prepared to leave, David's best man, Jack, approached, his expression heavy with concern. "Dave," he said gently, resting a hand on his friend's shoulder, "what do you want us to do about all this?" He gestured toward the guests, who sat in uneasy silence. David dragged a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. I don't know, just tell everyone to go home. Apologize for me. I can't deal with this right now." Jack nodded firmly. "Don't worry. I'll handle it. You just focus on you and Ethan." David managed a faint, weary smile. "Thanks, Jack. I don't know what I'd do without you." As David and Ethan walked out with Officer Johnson, Jack's steady voice carried through the church, explaining the situation and asking the guests to quietly leave. The ride to the police station felt unreal. Ethan sat in the back watching the streets blur past, the familiar town suddenly strange. Beside him, David stared out the window, his eyes distant, uncharacteristically silent. At the station, they were led to a plain room with a table and chairs. Officer Johnson assured them it wasn't an interrogation room, just a quiet space. For hours, David and Ethan told their story. Ethan described the late-night conversations he had overheard, Emily's cruel treatment when David wasn't around, and the insurance policy and photos he'd discovered. David filled in the rest, recalling how Emily had slowly drawn him in, how she had suggested increasing his life insurance for Ethan's future. How she pushed him into dangerous activities disguised as adventures. I thought she was just spontaneous, David said hollowly. I never imagined. Ethan reached across the table and took his father's hand. David squeezed back, grateful for the boy's steady strength. Later that evening, Officer Rivera returned, announcing that Mark had been caught just blocks from the church. Under questioning, he cracked quickly. He revealed everything. Emily wasn't even Emily. Her real name was Sarah Connor, a seasoned con artist with a history of seducing wealthy men, draining them of money, and vanishing without a trace. Mark was her longtime partner in crime and in life. Together, they had pulled off countless schemes, but this one was the boldest and deadliest yet. They planned to stage an accident on David's honeymoon, cash in a $5 million insurance payout, and inherit his estate. As the full picture unfolded, David crumpled under the weight of betrayal. How could I have been so blind? He whispered. Don't blame yourself, Officer Johnson said gently. These people are professionals. They know how to manipulate. The important thing is they didn't succeed, thanks to your son. David turned to Ethan, pride and guilt warring in his eyes. You saved my life. I just wish I'd listened sooner. Ethan leaned against him. It's okay, Dad, we're safe now. But Emily, Sarah, had vanished after fleeing the church. An APB was issued, airports and bus stations alerted, but she knew how to disappear. That night, back at home, David parked the car but didn't move. His voice was low, heavy with emotion. Ethan, I owe you an apology. A big one. For not listening. For not seeing. For letting her into our lives. Ethan's eyes softened. You just wanted to be happy, Dad. You couldn't have known. Tears filled David's eyes as he pulled his son into a fierce hug. Never think you were the problem. You're the best thing in my life. They clung to each other in the quiet night, both finally letting go of the fear that had haunted them for months. The weeks that followed were a blur of police interviews, lawyers, and relentless calls from reporters. Mark's testimony exposed a trail of victims left behind by Emily and him. Still, she remained at large, her shadow stretching over their lives. To help Ethan feel safe, David installed new locks, cameras, and motion sensors. We're a team, he reminded his son often. You and me against the world. Slowly, life began to settle. A month later, Jack convinced them to take a camping trip. Out in the woods, away from reporters and fear, David watched his son laugh again. They hiked, fished, roasted marshmallows, and for the first time in months, life felt normal. On their last night by the fire, David pulled Ethan close. Thank you, buddy, he whispered. For what? Ethan asked. For being brave when I couldn't see the truth. For saving us both. Ethan nestled closer. We saved each other, Dad. 6 months later, the knock came at their door. Officer Johnson stood grim-faced. We found her, he said. David's breath caught. You arrested her? The officer shook his head. No. We found her body in a motel outside Vegas. She left a note. The words hit David like a blow. Ethan froze, wide-eyed, as Officer Johnson explained gently that Emily, or Sarah, had taken her own life. She wrote of regret and guilt, claiming she couldn't live with what she'd done. Father and son sat in silence long after the officer left, grappling with emotions too tangled for words. Do you think she really felt bad? Ethan asked quietly. David sighed. I don't know, buddy. People are complicated. What matters is we move forward, and they did. Together they healed. David poured himself into fatherhood. Ethan grew more confident, even developing a love for detective novels. Each year, on the anniversary of the wedding that wasn't, they created a new tradition, a picnic at a state park, a hike, and fishing by a quiet lake. One golden evening by the water, David turned to his son. You know what I've realized, Ethan? What? The most important relationship in my life isn't with anyone else. It's right here. He gently poked Ethan's chest. You and me, always. Ethan grinned, throwing his arms around his father. I love you, Dad. I love you too, kiddo. More than you'll ever know. The storm of betrayal had tried to tear them apart, but it only made them stronger. The story of the little boy who stopped his father's wedding became one of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between father and son. Together, they could face anything.